Podcasting, I think, plays a much different role in a marketing system than it did 5 years ago. I think that was my entry point to the world of online business. So I was always aware of that. And all the people, all
Mm.
my early role models were all podcasters. And, they might have also had blogs, or maybe at that point, not a lot of them had YouTube channels at that point.
Yeah.
But definitely like podcasting was their main content creation channel. So I think that was my introduction to online business. So that was always kind of like, okay, this is a great way to grow your business. And I think
Yeah.
it wasn't, I think it's more been in the past couple of years that I've actually had a kind of shifting perspective. And I think that things have changed in the world of podcasting here, where 5 years ago, you could start a show and there probably wasn't that much competition. So if you had a great sounding show and your content was okay, you're probably going to grow a pretty big audience. Whereas
Yeah.
today, you can have a great sounding show and great content and you can still remain entirely obscure. And so kind
Yeah.
of what I realized is that like a lot of our clients were signing up to work with us, starting shows, paying us quite a bit of money, and they weren't getting that great results. And some of them really were, and some of them weren't. And so I started getting curious about like, well, okay, both like let's take client A and client B. One's growing, one's not. They both have great shows. They both have great content, great big name guests. Like, what's the difference here? And what I realized is that today in like 2021, podcasting, I think, plays a much different role in a marketing system than it did 5 years ago. And so today, I think that podcasting, actually, I'll start with where most people are still kind of coming at podcasting from an outdated perspective, where they're starting a podcast, and this applies to any kind of content creation, as a tool for audience growth and exposure. And
Hmm.
it like definitely can do that. But of course, as anybody who has a podcast is likely aware, specifically podcasting, discoverability is still a major kind of hurdle or problem for podcasters. That there's been no great solution yet for just getting organic listeners, whether that's through SEO. Like there are, you can structure your podcast episodes and show in a way to encourage getting found, but none of the platforms are really that great at that yet. And I think that's going to be changing, but at this point, it's not. And so people start podcasts as a way to grow their audience, but what they don't realize is that you actually have to like market your marketing, which is the podcast, and that no show is really going to grow that much. And there are exceptions. Most shows, though, I should say, are not going to grow without you actually doing outside marketing, pulling people to the show. And so that's kind of like disheartening when you think about it. You're like, well, okay, then why am I even starting the podcast if I have to market that to get people into the podcast, which is to get people into my business? So why don't I just do whatever the other thing is to get people into my business? But the point of the podcast is actually, and this is where podcasting is just the best platform out of any out there, is for building trust with people. And of course, as we all know, the whole know, like, and trust factor. People aren't going to buy from you if they don't have that trust with you. And I can't think of a better platform out there than podcasting for building trust, where people are, binging through episodes, potentially spending, 30 to 60 minutes with you in their ears. I listen, any of my favorite shows, like I have listened to hundreds and hundreds of hours of them. I've not come close to that on any YouTube channel. There might be a few blogs that I've read almost back to front, but not that many. And so podcasting is just such a versatile way to be able to, take our favorite people around with us and listen to their thoughts and really get that, kind of get inside their mind. I think that,
Yeah.
good YouTube is fairly highly edited, and even you have to be a really great writer to get a lot of the nuance and emotion across in your writing. Whereas podcasting, it's not highly edited in the same way that YouTube might be. It doesn't feel as much of a performance sometimes. I think it's much more intimate, and
Yeah.
people are used to, just listening to more at length conversations that are just free flowing. And, we know that a lot of times as podcast producers, they are quite highly edited, but they still feel more natural, and they're not quite as like snappy and to the point as YouTube
Yeah.
content might be to keep people engaged. And so I think like with that over time, like podcast listeners, like anybody who's listening to this, think of your favorite shows. Like you feel like the host, and when they come out with a new product or offer, if it's a good fit for you, it's like the decision's already been made. Like you're
Right.
going to
Yeah.
buy it. I think it's just a reframe there that people need to say like, okay, well, the podcast plays one role, which is the trust building tool, and then we need something else, which is the exposure tool, in order to get people into the podcast. And just exposure alone is not going to turn into sales. It needs that exposure, then the trust, and then you're going to convert people into clients and customers.